Good morning, everybody. So glad to be with you guys this morning as we hang out on this Sunday morning, and I lose my notes over here. But for those of you guys who don't know me, my name is Steve, and I'm one of the pastors on the team here, and just want to say a huge welcome, especially if you're new around here. We are so glad that you're here with us, and you actually picked the perfect time to come because today we're launching into a brand new series called Me to We. And this is going to be a fun series because in this series, we're going to be exploring relationships and why community and the people in your life are so important. And so we're going to have a lot of fun with it. It's going to be good. And here's kind of my goal for today. Here's where we're going. My goal is to do everything in my power to persuade you, to convince you that simply this, that we is greater than me. That's it. That we is greater than me. Or another way of saying that is that life is just better when we live it together. And we truly believe that life is just better when we live it together. And so specifically today, I'm going to address those of us in the room who, if you call yourself a follower of Christ, I want to try to show you that moving from me to we may be the most important thing you do to really help you grow in your relationship with God. So that's where we're going today. We're going to have fun, and I thought it would be fitting for me to kind of kick this series off because actually this year, my little family has actually, you could kind of say, moved from me to we, because earlier this year, my wife had our firstborn son, Davis, and he's awesome. I brought a picture of them for you. For those of you who don't know, this is my wife, Natalie. This is my little kid, Davis. Isn't he just awesome? Look at him. I mean, he's so handsome, and she's a stud, so it's awesome. So this is my family, and for those of you who don't know Davis, Davis is about 6 months old, and his hobbies consist of eating a lot, all the time, and rolling around on the floor, and that's literally all he does with his life. So he's living pretty good. We've been trying to get him to crawl this past few weeks, and he's just not really having it. He just likes to sit there and roll, and he doesn't really want to move at all, and so we're working on it. Honestly, I think he's just a little lazy, so it happens to the best of us. I think he gets it from his mom, so there's that. Thankfully, she's not in this service. I think she's helping in the nursery, so I can talk about Natalie all I want and, all is well. But no, I'm just kidding. He definitely gets it from me. If I was honest, I think my idea of a good day is living kind of like Davis gets to live. After this, I would love to go home and just eat lots of food, watch football, and maybe just roll around on the floor for a little while. It sounds good to me. But unfortunately, that kind of gets me in a little trouble. Actually, this year, since we're in church, thought we'd have a little confessional time. This year, I've actually had a little too many of those days because I've actually gained a little bit of weight. My wife reminds me of this every day, so that's nice. But gained a little weight this year. And at first, I thought it was just because, my wife, she had a baby, and so I'm trying to be a supportive husband. I'm trying to really show her that I care. So I put on a little sympathy weight, you could say. What I didn't realize at the time, I just didn't realize how incredibly sympathetic of a person that I actually am. Because apparently I'm very, very sympathetic. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like it has gotten to the point where my clothes are not fitting like they used to. I don't know if anyone else has had this problem, but I put on this shirt and it's like, man, this thing just doesn't fit anymore. And it's gotten to the point where I've literally launched a full-scale investigation on my washer and dryer because I'm convinced that it shrinks all my clothes. And it's only my clothes, which is super weird, but I guess, that is what it is. But the sad thing about, me putting on a little weight this year, the sad thing about that is actually back in January, I actually got a gym membership. I don't know if anybody else has a gym membership in here. I got a gym membership, and I thought, to myself, hey, this is going to be the year where I get in shape. This is going to be the year where I get buff, and, I'm going to be healthy. This is the year. And as you can imagine, it didn't quite turn out that way. In fact, I went into the gym a couple weeks ago, and they actually told me, as I was checking in, that the guy behind the counter reminded me, he said, hey, just so you know, this is the 4th time that you've been in this year. So thank you for that. It was a little bit humiliating because there was other people in the lobby as well, and they all started judging me instantly. So there was that. But see, it was interesting because I started off this year with just great intentions, right? I mean, this was going to be my year to get healthy. I was going to be in the gym consistently. I started off, and then inevitably what happens, right? Because it happens to all of us. Inevitably, I got a little busy, and I sort of kind of had some other things and lost, interest a little bit. And inevitably, I started to drift, you could say. And see, we all do this. We all drift. We do this in almost every area of our life. Anything that's important, we tend to drift from those things. And it's in all sorts of areas. In fact, if it's good for us, we tend to drift from it. If it's good for us, we tend to drift from it, right? We rarely ever drift in a good direction, right? And we know this intuitively. I don't have to convince you of this because you guys have seen this play out in your life over and over again, right? Whether it's with exercising or diet or maybe it's your academics and your studies or your finances or even your friendships, right? We all have this tendency to drift. I mean, if you want to have a healthy relationship, you never just drift into a healthy relationship, right? Like, you never accidentally lose weight. Like, that doesn't really happen. You don't really drift into getting out of debt. That's just not really the way that it works. If we want to be healthy in those areas, well, what does it take? Well, it takes discipline. It takes maybe delayed gratification. It takes time. It takes intentionality, right? And when we're not intentional and we don't do those things, well, what happens? Well, we gain weight, right? I mean, case in point, we gain weight. We go into more debt. We don't pass our tests. Because why? Because we have this tendency, and we all have this tendency to drift. And see, the reality is that the current of life is generally taking us in the wrong direction. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced that before, but generally, the current of life takes us in the wrong direction. And in every area of life that is important, we are swimming upstream. I mean, isn't that true? And here's what we all know to be true because we've all lived this out, right? That when it comes to swimming upstream, it's always worth it, isn't it? I mean, it's always worth it. It's always worth it to swim against the current of life, to make that intentionality and put that effort into becoming better or doing that thing right. Because on the other side of that, what happens? We grow, right? We grow. We become a better version of ourselves. And it's always a result of choosing not to drift and choosing to swim upstream. Now, this brings us to one of the core values of our faith, of Christianity. And this is really central to everything that we do at Icon Church and why we're doing this series from me to we. Because when it comes to swimming upstream, you and I as Christians and as followers of Christ have not been called to swim alone. But we've been called to swim together. Because I don't know if you realize this, but man, when you're in a community of other people, when you're in a circle of friends who are all going in the same direction as you, I mean, it just makes it so much easier, doesn't it? I mean, haven't you experienced that before? I mean, it's the difference between when you go to work out at the gym, right? And you drag yourself out of bed and you kind of hit the snooze button a couple times and you go to work out by yourself, but you just kind of get a little tired, so you just kind of cut the workout a little short. It's the difference between that and like having a workout buddy with you, right? Where he's pushing you and they're motivating you and they're keeping you accountable, right? It just makes it so much easier when we have people that are going in the same direction as us. And when it comes to our faith, you guys got to get this. This is absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical because here's what we know is that if we're going to grow spiritually, it happens best within the context of community. And what we're going to discover today is this, is that if you want to grow spiritually, commitment isn't enough. You must be connected. You got to be connected. Commitment is important. Man, it's important to have commitment. It's important that you have a plan and you have great intentions and all those things. That's great. But if you really want to grow spiritually, it's not enough. You must be connected. We must learn to move from me to we. Now, this isn't a new idea that, we came up here at Icon Church or anything like that. This is actually an idea that's been, we've been trying to figure out for centuries. In fact, all the way back in the first century, they addressed this idea of living in community and what it means to swim upstream together. And there's actually a passage in the scriptures in this little book called Hebrews. And the author of this passage, he actually addresses this idea of living in community and the power of community and living in circles. And he addresses specifically why it's so important for us to swim upstream together. So I want to show you this in Hebrews chapter 3. This is what it says. It says, "See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God." Now we'll pause here because I I don't know if you ever read a verse like that, but I mean, have you ever realized just the absurdity of this verse, right? Like who in their right mind would ever turn away from the living God? Like who would ever do that, right? Like who would know God? Know that God loves them, know that God cares about them, know that God wants what's best for their lives, know all of that, and still look at God and say, no, I think I'm going to turn away from you. Like who would do that? Who would look at God and say no? Right? Who in their right mind would ever do that? Yeah, me, you, right? We've all done this in our own ways over and over again. And what the author of this passage is getting at is he is acknowledging the fact that you have the capacity and I have the capacity, regardless of what you believe. This is important. And regardless of how long you have believed it, he is telling us that we have the capacity to turn away from the living God. Why? Because we all have this tendency to drift in every area of life that's important, especially in our relationship with God. We're swimming against the current. And the reality is this, is that there may be some of you in this room today where you maybe wouldn't put it in those terms. You maybe wouldn't put it, in this exact verbiage, but you'd say, you know what? That's kind of my story, because I was following God, and I used to go to church all the time, and I don't really know what happened. Just one thing sort of led to another, and I kind of lost interest, and I guess I started to drift. And for some of you, maybe today is the first time that you've been in church in a really long time, and I just want you to know, from our entire church, man, you are welcome here, and we're so glad that you're here today. But we all have that tendency because we all tend to drift. But interestingly enough, in this verse, this first century author, he actually gives us the solution to not turn away from God, to not drift. He gives us the key. And we have to understand, as you look in the context of this entire passage, is that this verse is actually not a command to an individual. It's not just an individual imperative, but rather this is actually written to a group of people. And it's actually a command that you kind of look at it as a group command. Notice the plurals here. He says, see to it, brothers, right? And sisters, that none of you, right? This is a plural thing. This is a group thing. He's writing this to an entire group of people, and he's saying, hey, this isn't just, hey, Steve, you make sure that Steve doesn't have an unbelieving, sinful heart. He's not saying that. He's saying you all need to look at this together because this is a group command. He's saying, here's what you need to do. You need to what? You need to see to it. In other words, you need to open your eyes and see to your brothers and sisters. You need to, what is he getting at? He's saying you need to know the people around you. You need to get into each other's lives. He's saying, I don't want you to just come to church on Sundays and walk in the doors anonymously and walk out and nobody knows you. He's saying, no, you need to check on each other. You need to keep each other in line. You need to see to one another. It's so, so important. He's saying you need to see to it. Why? Well, because that drift that we talked about, that we all have that tendency to have that drifting heart. Do you know where that begins? Do you know where it begins? It begins inside, right? That's why he says, make sure none of you have an unbelieving heart. That tendency that we all have to drift. You know where that begins? It always begins within. The drift begins within. It always starts with what? It starts with a temptation, right? Where you're kind of by yourself and you think to yourself, man, yeah, I know I shouldn't do this, but I really want to. And it starts with a temptation. That's where the drift starts. Or maybe for you, it starts with a doubt where you think, man, I just don't know if I believe that anymore. I'm not sure if that really makes sense to me. Or maybe it starts with a question, like, does that verse really mean that? And all of a sudden what happens is this drift starts to happen within. It starts to happen inside, and you start to lose interest, and you start to drift. Now, here's where this becomes a really, really big problem, is because when that drift that begins within, when that starts, here's the problem. Nobody knows, right? Like nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going on in your head and your heart. No one knows the thoughts that you're dealing with. No one knows the struggles that you have. No one knows the questions that you have. Nobody knows when that drift begins. That is, unless somebody is seeing to it. In other words, unless somebody really knows you. In other words, unless somebody has access to you, someone that you've given permission to see to you. Now, here's the problem. This is so important. The writer says this is the solution to not drifting. But the problem is when it comes to church, we can walk in these doors, and you can sit in these rows, and you can sit in these chairs, and yet you'll still be unknown, because just coming to church in and of itself isn't enough to be known. You know why? It's because the rows don't know. The rows don't know. The rows don't know because a drifting heart doesn't show in a row. It doesn't show when you sit in rows like this on a Sunday morning. This is so important, but a drifting heart doesn't show in a row. Why? Because you and I are so good at looking good, right? I mean, you're great at coming in here and you dress up and you have your Sunday best on and life just looks great. But no one knows that on the way here, you're driving in your little minivan and you're screaming at your family and you're cussing at your husband and there's just chaos in the car, right? No one knows that because what'd you do? Well, you came in and you parked your car and you found a spot that hopefully wasn't in the grass, but maybe it was because it gets crazy here on Sundays, right? And what'd you do? You took a deep breath. You told the kids, hey, we'll figure this out later. You put a little makeup on, you straightened your hair, and you came in, and everyone was smiles, and life was great, and everyone looks at you, and they look at you and think, man, everything's going awesome, because why? Because the rows don't know. Your drifting heart doesn't show in a row. What's going on in your life doesn't show when you come in here and you sit in a row. It doesn't show in a row. The only way that anyone's ever going to know what's really happening in your life is if they have access to you and if you are in a circle with them. It's the only way. You know how I know that? It's because that's my story. I've talked about this here before a little bit, and I don't have time to go in depth, but before I gave my life to Christ, I was in a really dark place. I was just in a rough place personally and spiritually. I was very depressed. I was doing just all kinds of drugs daily. I was literally getting high every single day. I was drinking all the time. It was in a dark place for me. And things even got so bad that it even escalated to the point where I was actually stealing money from my work to be able to support my habits. It was bad. But you know the interesting thing? Do you know where I was at every single Sunday? I was in church. I was sitting in rows just like this. And you know what? Nobody knew what was going on in my life. Nobody knew what was going on in my heart. Nobody knew the struggles and the pain that I was going through. Nobody knew. Why? Because my drifting, hurting heart didn't show in a row. And so I came to church every week for like 2 years, and nobody knew. Was it important that I came to church? Yeah, but nobody knew. And fast forward a couple years, and it's a long story. I wish I had more time to get into it, but I finally had this moment where God just got a hold of my life. And I came to church this one night, and for the first time I realized that God, He really cared about me, and that He loved me. And for the first time, I committed my life to following Jesus. And I want to tell you, you want to know what I think really saved my life looking back? The most important thing that happened was that same night that I committed my life to Jesus at the front of a church just like this. I had an older woman in our church by the name of Barb McConville. And Barb walked down to me and she talked to me for a few minutes, and Barb invited me to her small group. And it was this little small group that met at her house every Saturday night. It went through a little Bible study, and she invited me to come. And all of a sudden, what happened? Well, I started to connect with other people. And people started to get to know me. And people started to know what was going on in my life. And all of a sudden, people had access to me that they never had before. And all of a sudden, I wasn't living on an island isolated, but all of a sudden, I got connected. And it changed everything. And it wasn't until I moved from shoulder to face that I began to become known. It wasn't until I moved from the rows to the circle that people began to know me. And can I just tell you, looking back, that was the most important catalyst to me not drifting back into my old habits. Because I'm telling you, I would have, but I had people that knew me and had access to me and could connect with me. And so the writer of our passage in Hebrews, he goes on and he says this in the next verse. He says, but encourage one another. He says, hey, listen, you guys need to see to each other, and here's how you do it. Encourage one another. Now, that word encourage here, that doesn't just mean like, hey, slap a high five to somebody and say something nice about them. Though, if anyone wants to do that to me, I will take it, right? But it's something deeper than that. He says this word is actually a little Greek word, and it's translated, He says appeal to, or exhort, or urge strongly, or implore, or if need be, beg. And literally all throughout scriptures in the New Testament and all throughout Greek literature, this word encourage is translated like this. You say, well, what does that mean? What's the author getting at? He's saying, listen, you need to encourage each other. You need to be in each other's lives, and you need to help each other continue to swim against the current and swim upstream. And you need to do whatever it takes to appeal to or to urge strongly to stay on track, or if need be, even beg. You've got to encourage each other because we need each other. I mean, imagine this. He's saying, I want you to be in each other's lives. I want you to know what's going on. I don't want you to just be anonymous on a Sunday morning, but I want you to be in each other's lives to the degree that you can see when someone's a little off. To the degree that you notice when somebody doesn't show up on a Sunday morning and you can talk to them. He's saying, I want you to be so much in each other's lives that you notice and you can say something so that no one has to struggle alone. I mean, think about that. He's saying, I don't want you to come in here and not have any relationships. I want you to know, because I don't want you to ever struggle alone. So that your teenager, so that when they're going through that season that you know they're never going to talk to you about and they're trying to figure this out, so that they're connected, that they never have to struggle alone. So that your wife, that when she's at home and she's trying to figure out this thing, so she never has to feel alone, like no one else understands. So that when you're going through a crisis season, and we all go through crisis seasons, that you don't have to hurt alone, but that you're connected to other people. I mean, imagine what this could have been like. Imagine how differently things could have turned out in your family growing up if your parents, maybe your mom or your dad or both of them, would have been connected to a circle where people really knew them and they had access to them. Where they could have said, hey, is everything okay? Hey, I noticed this. Hey, can we grab coffee? Can we talk? Imagine how differently things could have turned out if your parents would have been connected, right? Imagine the heartache that could have been avoided if they had someone in their life that was encouraging them. I mean, imagine what difference it could have made. It would have been huge. And the crazy thing is that many of your parents, man, they were in rows like this every single Sunday, but the rows didn't know. So the author says this, he says, we need to encourage each other. Well, how often? How about daily, right? He says daily, as long as it is called today, we need to encourage each other. What is he getting at? He's saying, listen, this is an ongoing thing. This isn't a once-in-a-lifetime thing. This is an ongoing thing. This is a relational thing. He's saying you need to encourage each other and be in each other's life ongoing. Well, for how long? As long as it's called today, right? In other words, as long as you have a pulse. As long as you're breathing, we need each other because it's the only way that we're going to be able to swim upstream and become the kind of people that God wants us to be. He's saying we need each other. We need circles. And then he goes on from there and he tells us, hey, here's why this is so important. Here's why it's so incredibly important that you stay connected and that you're in circles. He says this, so that, meaning here's the reason why, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. He's saying you got to stay connected. You got to encourage each other. You got to be in each other's lives so that none of you are hardened by sin's deceitfulness. You want to know how sin tends to deceive us most of the time? You want to know how we tend to get fooled over and over again and we fall into the same habits and the same patterns? It's by our thoughts, right? I mean, it's by the things that we're thinking. You know what we're really good at? Each and every single one of you, man, you guys are all amazing at this, and I know because I'm amazing at this. We are incredibly talented at talking ourselves into doing really stupid things, right? I mean, we really are. I mean, we are so good at convincing ourselves and justifying things to ourselves. And what happens? We have this self-talk, right? We're sitting there and we know this thing we shouldn't do, and we think to ourselves, well, I mean, you really deserve this. Or, well, I mean, no one will ever know. Or well, I mean, my wife practically forced me to do this because she did blah, blah, blah. Well, my parents will never find out. And we start this self-talk and we start to deceive ourselves. And what happens is before long, we start to believe ourselves. And we start to fall into this trap of deceit. And the author of this text, he's saying this. He's saying the best defense against deceit is not a me. It's not you. The best defense against deceit is a we. He's saying we is the best defense against the deceitfulness of sin in me. Because why? Because we is greater than me. Because we all need people in our lives who we know who are going to tell us the truth, even when we don't want to hear it. People in our lives who know us and love us enough to tell us, hey man, I think you're acting a little crazy, right? We need that. We need those people in our lives who love us and will encourage us and will appeal to us. And if need be, will beg us to do the things that we know we should do to help us swim upstream together. And when we have that, I'm telling you, it changes everything. I mean, this is the power of community. This is the power of circles. This is the power of swimming together. And here's the whole point of this passage that the author is getting at. The whole point is simply this, that the drift, it begins within, so let someone in. The drift begins within, so let someone in. That's it. And if you will allow someone in while the drift is still within, I promise you, it is going to keep you from doing things that you will regret, right? It is going to keep you from drifting. It's going to keep you and equip you to grow and to make the right kind of decisions. And it happens when we find our circle, when we get connected to other people, it positions us to grow personally and spiritually like never before. So imagine what it could be like for your kids, for your family, if you were all connected in circles, if you weren't by yourself, if you weren't isolated. Imagine how different things could be for your kids if they were connected to a circle where they were being influenced in a positive way, where they're having friendships with leaders and other students, the kind of friendships that man, they're telling them the same things that you would tell them, but your kids will actually listen to them because they're not you, right? Imagine if they had that. Imagine the kind of difference it can make. Imagine if your kids were connected in a circle and they didn't have to make some of the same mistakes that you made. Imagine what that could do. It could change everything. Imagine how different your marriage could be if you were in a circle with other couples and you didn't have to figure everything out by yourself, and you're in a circle with people who are maybe a little further along than you, or maybe they're going the same direction as you. Imagine how different it could be if people could look at you and just, they knew you and you knew them, and you could talk, and you didn't have to be alone, and they could just look at you and say, hey, listen, you're not crazy. You know? I think sometimes we just feel so crazy like we're the only ones. Imagine if they looked at you and said, hey, you're not the only one. Let's figure this out together. And your marriage could actually, instead of being stagnant or instead of even going in the wrong direction, what if your marriage could look greater than it's ever been because you were connected? Imagine what it would be like if you had friends in your life who really knew you and really loved you. The kind of friends where it's okay to not be okay, and they're still going to love you and encourage you. Imagine what that could be like. Imagine what your relationship with God could be like if you didn't have to figure it all out by yourself, but you were running in the same direction as other people, and they're encouraging you, and you can ask questions together, and you're just, imagine the difference it could make if you got connected in a circle and you want to grow spiritually. Because if you want to grow spiritually, remember, commitment isn't enough. You have to be connected. And this is what small groups at Icon Church are all about. It's this right here. This is why we have small groups, because here's the deal. Here at Icon, listen, we love Sunday mornings. We love coming in this room and getting to worship together. We love getting to hear a message from Dan or whoever. We love that. It's so important, so necessary. But from the beginning at Icon Church, we have always said that circles are better than rows. Why? Well, it's because what we talked about today, because the rows don't know. And if we're ever going to grow spiritually, we're going to have to get into circles. And here at Icon, we refuse to live life alone. And so we've said, man, we want every single person that walks in these doors, we want every single one of you, every single person that walks into Icon Church to feel loved and to feel known and to experience the power of being connected to others, because we so believe this is so important. And this is why we want every single one of you to be connected to a small group. I mean, it's so important. Now, I know that we've spent the last several minutes kind of talking about the spiritual component of it, how it's so important for us to be in a small group so we don't drift and so we can keep each other in line so that we're known and loved. And that's also true, but I also want to give you the other side that, listen, small groups are they're just fun. I mean, it's one of my favorite times of the week because I get to hang out with some friends and just sort of relax. And it's a place where you can kind of let your hair down. For those of you who have hair, this is a place that you can do that, right? And it's just fun. It's fun to get to just connect with other people and hang out. And here's what my small group looks like. For those of you who are like, okay, what is this small group thing all about? Here's what it looks like for me at my group, okay? Most weeks, we just cram into my tiny little apartment and we hang out together. We eat a meal together. We talk about each other's weeks. We catch up with each other. We talk about each other's kids and how crazy they are, right? And then, we may watch the game, right? We may play a game. We may talk about the message on Sunday, but at the end of the day, what are we doing? We're just connecting and hanging out and building relationships. Why? Because we understand the importance of staying connected, because none of us, we don't want to live isolated. And you know what? Back earlier this year when my wife and I, when we had our baby Davis, do you know who came and visited us in the hospital? It was my small group. And when we got home and we were trying to figure out how to be parents and what this looked like, we had this crazy kid that was crying all the time. You know who came and brought us meals every single night? It was our small group. And about a year and a half ago when we had that flooding and we were in a flood zone, do you know who called me and woke me up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the flooding to make sure that we were okay? It was John from my small group. I mean, I so badly want every single one of you in this room to have friendships like that. That when you're going through a tough time, you have people that know and care. That when there's a flood, you have somebody that calls you at 3 a.m. That when you or family members in the hospital, you have people that are visiting and taking care of you. That when you're just having a good day, man, people are hanging out with you and you can have the kind of friendships that are life-giving. I so badly want that for every single one of you. And this is why we want every single person here to be in a small group. So here's the deal. Here's how we're going to end today. I want to challenge each of you to join a small group today, to try it out, okay? This isn't a life sentence. If you get in a group and you're like, man, it just doesn't really feel like a fit, try a different one, but it's so important. And listen, we have groups literally all over Hays County, okay? I mean, we have groups that meet on all different days of the week. We have groups for all different ages and stages. If you're a college student, we have groups for you. If you're a mom, we have groups for you. If you're a couple, we have groups for you. If you're a person with a heartbeat, we have a group for you, I promise, okay? And we so badly want every single one of you to be in a group that today we're actually launching 14 new groups. Why? Because we wanted to make sure that we had room for every single one of you to get connected. So today, we wanted to make it as simple as possible and as easy as possible for you to get connected. So here's how we're going to end. Right after I dismiss here in just a moment, we're going to have a small group rally. You say, what is that? Well, right in this room, right back here on this side, you go out these doors, hang a left, right back there, we're going to have all the small groups in there, okay? So all the new groups that are launching, there's going to be signs that say, here's what day of the week they meet, here's where they meet, and you can walk in there and actually get to meet some different people and see which group is going to be a good fit for you that maybe works in your schedule. See which group, and you can connect with the leaders and see if it's a fit and all of that. And you can get connected to a small group today and actually try one out this week. And we want to make it as simple as possible. And if you even say, well, man, there's a lot of groups in there and I don't really know where to go. Don't worry, we thought of that too, okay? If you're like, what should I do? Which group? We have people in black shirts that says, find your circle. You can talk to any one of them and they will help you find the perfect group for you. We try to think of every single thing. So my challenge for you today is that no one would leave here before you get connected in a small group, that you would come and spend the next few minutes. I know we're all hungry. We're going to have lunch here in a little bit, but take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, head in here, find a group, and make sure you don't leave today until you get connected in a small group. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to lock the back doors so that no one, no, I'm just kidding. We're not that cultish, but we really mean this, man, because we don't want something from you, man. I'm telling you, we want something for you. And we think that this could be the most important thing you do this year because you're going to start to make some new friendships and relationships. And I'm telling you, being in that circle with people, man, it could change everything. So I want to challenge you. I'm going to pray for us in just a moment. And I want to challenge all of you, man, if you're not in a small group, head over there, get connected, find a group for you, try it out. And we want to get you connected. And let's all together take a step forward in moving from me to we. All right? So let me pray for you, and then we'll go ahead and move forward.